Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Elie Honig back with us. We'll chat with Elie in just a moment. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So Elie Honig is CNN's senior legal analyst. He previously worked for 14 years as a federal and state prosecutor. He is also the national best-selling author of 2 books, Hatchet Man, How Bill Barr Broke the Prosecutor's Code and Corrupted the Justice Department, and Untouchable, How Powerful People Get Away with It. He writes a weekly column for New York Magazine and for Cafe.com, and he hosts 2 podcasts for Vox Media. He teaches at Rutgers University and is special counsel to New Jersey law firm Lowenstein Sandler. His latest book is When You Come at the King, Inside DOJ's Pursuit of the President, from Nixon to Trump. Elie, welcome back into the back room.
Andy, great to see you. 2026. This is like my 5th year with you or something.
Yeah, or as I like to call it, your maybe your
Five-timers club.
Your second bathroom.
Oh
bathroom.
Yeah, gosh, you got me so people know. Saturday Night Live has this thing where they give a robe to or like a jacket, a smoking jacket, to everyone who's been a 5-time guest. When I hit number 5 with you, I jokingly asked for one, and you very seriously sent me a beautiful robe with a 5 patch. I think I'm up to 15 or something now, but yeah, I still have it.
We have to come up with maybe we do a 15 smoking jacket.
Yeah, I think that's right.
We'll come up with something, something to go with the bath. Maybe a towel to go with the bathrobe.
Yeah, I like it.
So there's been so much that has happened from a legal standpoint in 2025, so many important rulings. There are also a tremendous amount of cases that remain open that will be ruled on, assumably in 2026. So let's go through these 2 years in terms of the decisions that were made and that may be coming soon in 2026. So let's start with 2025 from a political, and if possible, because I know the political scene is what dominates a lot of these rulings, obviously, especially with Trump. But there's some, cases that were notable under the crime genre, also from a business standpoint. So we can go through that as well. But let's start with politics in 2025. What do you think were the biggest cases? I mean, we just had one last week with the National Guard from the Supreme Court.
I'm going to put the National Guard one in the ongoing category, but yes, a very big one. Yeah, it's interesting that you divide it that way, Andy, because a couple things. First of all, there's not really like a neat dividing line because a lot of the biggest, most important cases of 2025 will carry on to 26, but I'll save those. For now, I'll focus on the ones that are sort of done now and we're finished in 25. And also, you're right to say there's a line between the cases that matter politically and the sort of, I don't know, what you would call like the true crime cases, that kind of thing. Like we did a thing at CNN where I did an on-air thing about the 5 biggest cases to watch for 26, and they were all related somehow to politics or the White House or Congress or Trump or gerrymandering or whatever. And then there was a separate thing that they did online, which Jeannie Casares, who covers a lot of our true crime trials, did on the top 10 of 2025. And there was no overlap. It was all, this woman murdered her husband, this husband murdered his wife, that kind of stuff. So there's very different types of cases. So looking back at 25 cases that are sort of done, a couple big ones. The gerrymandering case, this just came out a couple weeks ago, right? So you see this rush to re-gerrymander, redistrict mid-decade. And by the way, when I first heard that Trump is calling on Texas to do this, my first reaction was, you can't do that. That's illegal. We're mid-decade. But of course, then I researched it and said, oh, you can. There's nothing in the law. I mean, traditionally, it's done at the beginning of each decade after the census, but you can do it mid-decade. That kicked off this sort of arms race where Texas tried to redistrict, California did. And the Texas redistricting was challenged in the courts and initially was blocked because the courts said that it was, so the courts have basically taken a view of, we are out of the business of monitoring redistricting. That's a political exercise. That's really not for us unless it crosses the line into racial discrimination or the like. And the lower courts had said that the Texas redistricting did cross that line, did violate racial gerrymandering, and therefore put it on hold. The Supreme Court a few weeks ago unpaused it and basically said, no, we think they applied the test wrong and therefore it can continue. And so what that means is Texas will be able to redistrict for the 26 midterms. California looks like they're going to be able to do so as well. But the import of that decision by the Supreme Court is like, we are really, really out of gerrymandering. I mean, they already were 1.5 feet out of getting involved in gerrymandering. And now they're basically just like, don't even bother. Don't even waste your time. The states can do as they will. It'll be interesting to see if they take the same point of view with California, if and when that gets challenged. But for now, it's a free-for-all when it comes to redistricting. And I think that was maybe the biggest case, not the sexiest case, but the case of the most import that came out of 2025 in terms of political impact.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you want my next one?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Nationwide injunction. So this was the biggest decision of the Supreme Court, right? And for years we've had this practice, and it really goes back to actually the late George W. Bush era. It really kicked up during the Obama era, then really kicked up during Trump 1, then happened quite a bit during Biden, and now happens all the time during Trump 2, which is the president will issue an executive order and an individual district court judge. So people understand, we have 94 federal districts. They funnel up into 13 federal courts of appeals, which funnels up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And you would have one federal district court judge, at time often judge shopped. You know, if liberals were doing it, they would file in Massachusetts or, where D.C. And if conservatives are doing it, they would run to the Western District of Texas or whatever. But one individual district court judge blocking a presidential action nationwide. And we call those nationwide injunctions. And both sides sort of hated those. The rule was whoever's in the White House hates them. But, they were used most often to block Trump because he's the most aggressive of the presidents in terms of using executive power. He tends to push the boundaries more than other presidents. And finally, the U.S. Supreme Court said you can't do it anymore unless very narrow, very extreme circumstances. So that means that when the president, it leaves us in a state of limbo. What if a president issues a nationwide order that has nationwide impact? The only way you can't challenge it direct to the Supreme Court. You have to start with the district court. So what's a district court judge going to say? It's unconstitutional here in the District of New Jersey. I don't know about the other 93 districts. What if you have 10 districts saying it's constitutional, 10 saying it's unconstitutional? That said, I think it was probably the right decision ultimately. I do think there's a problem with individual district court judges. There's 300 of them or something in the 94 districts, more than that, I think. 600, I think, is the number. So it is a problem if you have one judge in pick your district saying, I block everything I block this move by the president for the entire country. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's constitutionally correct. I don't think that's politically correct. So that's another big decision that came out of 25. The last thing that I think came out of 25 that is final is the Trump cases are over. The cases against Trump are over. They were dead, effectively when Trump won re-election in 24, but they all were formally dismissed. And two cases, I think, are all but dead and buried now, as they should be. And you and I may disagree. I think we disagree on this. Maybe not. The Fani Willis case was officially ended in Georgia, not only because of Fani Willis's misconduct, but because the case itself was flawed. There was an opinion that came out from a conservative, from a Republican DA who finally inherited this case about a month ago. And he said it never should have been brought. It's not an appropriate state level case. I've said this to you for years, Andy. It should have been charged by the feds and the feds alone. It was improper for the state to pile on. They did not have a RICO charge. It was overcharged. The indictment's a mess. It's all over the map. And that case is dead and buried. And then the other one that really received and look, I'm not a Trump fan politically, but I also have not been afraid to criticize some of what I believe to be the overreaches against him. The Letitia James indictment. We'll get back to Letitia James in a minute, because that's going to be one of the big cases in 26, carrying from 25 to 26. But the Letitia James civil lawsuit, not indictment, civil lawsuit against Trump for overvaluing his assets, which resulted in a verdict worth with interest close to $500 million. A liberal court of appeals in New York State threw out most of that verdict. They vacated the damages amount down to zero because, as I'm sure there's video of you and me, Andy, in 2023, me saying the problem is there's no victims who suffered loss. It's exactly what the appeals court said. I think that case was a travesty. I think the prosecutions of Letitia James are even more of a travesty. But I think, look, I'll put you on the spot, Andy. I think liberals need to acknowledge that some of that the Fonnie Willis case was an overreach and the Letitia James case was a politically driven overreach. Do you agree or do you disagree?
Oh, I like the way you put that. I'm gonna have to respectfully disagree.
Okay,
although
please,
I will defer and say I don't have a law degree, so I have not dissected it.
You don't need a law degree,
from a legal standpoint, and that maybe if I was a lawyer and I understood the law the way you do, maybe I'd have a different opinion. But the thing with the Tish James case and the judgment,
let's focus on that one. That one's clean
because that is interesting from the standpoint of the banks all made money, right?
They did,
but what if they didn't? Right? What if they didn't?
It would have been a different case. I mean, it would have been more certainly would have been much more justifiable if, for example, Trump overstated his assets and then defaulted on it. And they said, look, we believe that he had a 3 times bigger apartment than he had, and that was important to us. And then he defaulted. That's exactly why, one of the reasons why I thought the case was inappropriate, because where prosecutors get intake like that, you go, well, did anyone lose money? And if the answer is no, they all got paid with interest. You go, why would I do this? And what I really object to is the fact that Letitia James explicitly ran on that. That was the number one point of her campaign for AG in 2018. She repeated it in 2022, was vote for me, I'll get this guy. And boy, are we seeing that come back around.
Well,
and by the way, I do not think that the fact that Letitia James did that in any way justifies Trump doing it, but he's using it. It's a bad,
of course.
As a friend of mine said on air, Jonah Goldberg said on air, the thing about slippery slopes is they're slippery and they get worse. And one of my wishes for 26 is not going to come true, is that both sides, and Republicans are doing it worse than Democrats, but Democrats started it. Both sides knock this shit off with the retributive, let me list out who I don't like, who I think I can profit from politically, and use my prosecutorial powers to go after them.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is not a critical legal argument, but if I go and rob a liquor store because I need money, and then my uncle loans me money 3 hours later, and I run back to the liquor store and I pay the guy, and then I say, hey, nobody lost any money. Like, I still committed a crime,
but that's
and it could have gone the other way.
Yeah, we won't go too far down this, but I mean, when you rob the liquor store, that is inherently wrong. If you pull a gun on a liquor store, I mean, that's dangerous.
But isn't falsifying documents inherently
It's inherently wrong, but it's not the same type of crime. It's not the same type of danger.
Still a crime. So, and it could have.
But it's not a crime. It's not. Well, if it's a crime, why didn't she indict him? She never indicted him. She brought a civil lawsuit.
Right.
So, but I mean, the campaign part of it. Do you have any problem with that? The way she campaigned?
Oh yeah, I think. Okay. Look, I'm no fan of Merrick Garland, but I believe in the Merrick Garland philosophy of keep your mouth shut. Right.
I agree with that.
So
I agree with that.
Politics and the law should not be merged.
100%. Okay.
Especially when it came to Donald Trump, because to your point, he's a master at taking what he can and manipulating it to the point where it becomes incredibly exploitative, and he used that to his advantage. To your point.
That's a perfect lead into 26. Do you want to get into that?
Yeah, but I have one question about 25, because we learned this new phrase in 25, or at least I did, the non-lawyers, and that is the shadow docket, okay, which is what enabled Donald Trump through the Supreme Court to sign all these executive orders and do all these things that he wanted, really bad things like freezing $4 billion in foreign aid and ending policy which allowed people to self-identify gender on passports, cutting $800 million in National Institutes of Health grants for research on diseases in minority and LGBTQ communities, allowing federal agents to racially profile in immigration stops in LA. All of this came under this shadow docket. Can you explain to us what the hell a shadow docket is and why it was so significant in 25 and why it could be significant again in 26?
I'm so glad you raised this. This is such a crucial point because a lot of the cases we're going to discuss are on the shadow docket. So the Supreme Court has sort of two ways to consider a case. There's the traditional way that you're taught in law school. In fact, I don't think I was ever taught about the shadow docket in law school. I don't think it ever came up. It was a long time ago. But the way that you normally hear a case is you go up through the lower courts. If you lose, you ask the Supreme Court for cert, meaning you ask them to take the case. You write a brief why they should take the case. They sit on it for a few months. They say, we're taking it or we're not. If they take it, then there's this long process of extensive, beautiful briefs being submitted and fancy oral argument. And then months later, they issue a very formal, very careful ruling. I'm making it sound, it's long and deliberate, and at times it should be expedited a bit, but that's the ordinary process. The vast majority of the cases of political impact from the last 2 years have come, though, the other way, which is the shadow docket. By the way, the justices hate that term. Oh, you shouldn't call it that. You should call it, they have what an expedition doc. They have some some softer word for it. But what that is your emergency cases where there's some time pressure and you can just sort of short circuit all that. You can go to them with very little briefing, sometimes just a letter brief, limited, if any, oral argument. The National Guard case that just came up, there was no oral argument. And they issue these temporary rulings, but they often have the effect of settling the issue. And there's been a lot of righteous, in my view, criticism of the Supreme Court's increasing reliance on the shadow docket. You get Steve Vladeck wrote a great book called The Shadow Docket, sort of essentially criticizing this practice and saying it's leading us to half-assed process, half-assed results. I'm vastly summarizing Steve's premise there, but he's right. And the shadow docket dominates now. And so when you see these rulings come out at all hours of the night and day, and they're 3 pages long with often a 25-page dissent, that is the shadow docket. And the rule with the shadow docket, there's a very simple rule, Andy. Whichever side loses hates the shadow docket. So over the last year and a half, Trump and conservatives have won the vast majority of these shadow docket cases. And the liberals in dissent sort of reliably criticized the shadow docket. Well, when the National Guard decision came down last week and Trump lost and the liberals were in the majority and 3 conservatives, Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch, were in the minority, they had a whole temper tantrum about the shadow docket. So it's very much based on the outcome. But it's really important that people understand a lot of the key decisions we're seeing are not coming through your full ordinary Supreme Court briefing and argument and decision process. And I think that's a problem the Supreme Court is going to have. I don't know how they deal with it, but they need to deal with it in a better way than just lecturing us that you shouldn't call it the shadow docket and how dare you criticize us, which tends to be their response to public criticism.
Yeah. And the other problem with that is that they kick these cases back down to the lower courts without real explanations as to what the courts need to do. And the courts are like, give us some guidelines as to what you're looking for. Don't just tell us to give us back what we're looking for without telling us what it is you're looking for. So that it just creates havoc up and down the judicial system.
And a lot of times just the emergency disposition itself effectively settles the issue. Like there won't be an issue after the emergency. Like, with the Alien Enemies Act, the deportation, it's like, well, they're in the air, it's kind of over now. Yeah.
Right. All right. So let's shift to 26. What are you looking at?
Okay. So a lot of big cases. So let's start with the Trump payback prosecutions of Letitia James and Jim Comey in particular. And then I put the John Bolton case sort of in a separate category. I think that one's actually valid. The reporting is that the Bolton investigation actually goes back to the Biden administration. Very serious conduct. Let's put that aside. I am not a fan, as you've already seen, of Letitia James. I'm not a fan of Jim Comey. I think the prosecutions of the two of them are an outrage and dangerous and leading us down a really, really fraught path. They've both been thrown out as of this moment because the U.S. attorney, Lindsay Halligan, was improperly installed. It actually has nothing to do with the fact that Lindsay Halligan's unqualified, like resume-wise. Right. It just has to do with she's a second temporary appointment. It's a whole boring thing under the Appointments Clause. And so DOJ has not given up the fight yet. They're doing 2 things. One, they're appealing that dismissal of the case based on the Appointments Clause. The other thing that's really embarrassing for DOJ and crazy is they've tried now twice to re-indict Letitia James, and twice 2 different grand juries have rejected it, which is almost impossible to do. Grand juries are rejecting this stuff. Good for them, because these cases are they're wafer thin. I don't think there's anything there on either of them. Although the evidence against Letitia James is a little mixed, depending how you looked at it. But they're clearly based on political payback. They're retributive prosecutions. They're vindictive. Those are legal terms, by the way. I think they can get these cases thrown out based on vindictive prosecution. And so the questions for 26 are, 1, will DOJ be able to revive either or both of those cases? And 2, and I think the answer is no, but I think no successfully. I don't think they will ever.
Isn't there a statute of limitations on the Comey case?
Yeah. So Comey was indicted for giving allegedly false testimony in September 30th of 2020. So the statute ran out September 30th, 2025. That's why they indicted him in a rush 4 or 5 days before that. Now, of course, we're well after that. There's some argument that you can kick over the statute of limitations if it got dismissed on appeal, if it got dismissed and then reinstated on appeal. But yes, there's going to be a statute of limitations. I don't think either of those cases ever reaches a jury. Mm-hmm. I think if they do manage to revive either of those cases, I think judges will throw them out for vindictive prosecution. And if they somehow reach a jury, I do not think we'll ever see convictions in either of them. The other big thing I'm watching on that payback tour is will Pam Bondi make good on Trump's wishes to indict other people? Adam Schiff, Lisa Cook, the Fed governor, Jack Smith. And I am in the same position on all of those. I think they're all bogus cases. I think they're all obviously politically driven. And, how much I sort of have asked this case, like how much losing and sort of, rake stepping to borrow from that Simpsons scene is the Trump administration DOJ willing to endure here? Like they've made their point kind of we're this is payback, but they're going to keep losing. They're not going to win any of these. And, there was an interesting poll that I think Marquette University did that came out a few weeks ago that showed that 48% of Trump supporters, or maybe conservatives, Republicans, not necessarily Trump supporters, but Republicans and conservatives, 48% don't want this payback. Democrats are, 80% don't want this or higher. But 48%, that there's a message. 47% of independents don't want this. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of resources. It's dangerous. I hope it ends. But I don't know. I mean, Pam Bondi has shown herself to be nothing if not compliant with the president's wishes. Todd Blanche as well. So that's a big one that I'm watching in 26.
What about the John Brennan and this whole other case that's happening, which is going to revive Aileen Cannon's stardom down there in Florida? She's presiding over this special federal grand jury that will investigate aspects of the FBI's raid on Mar-a-Lago, which Trump he's still pissed off about that, and this plot against Trump.
I'm in the same posture with that. Like, there are ways you can argue that the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago was inappropriate, shouldn't have been done, was unwise. I actually think it was perfectly appropriate. I think they gave him every chance, they subpoenaed him, etc. But you can have that political argument. Was this wise? Was this unwise? Was this too precipitous? But like with Jack Smith, I don't see the half of a millimeter of an ounce of a crime that anyone's committed. Now, who knows? Maybe something will come up that we're not aware of. But I put that in the same boat. And, the thing to keep in mind, if this grand jury is being sort of supervised by Aileen Cannon, she's not in the room with them. She's not voting with them. You go to the judge. If you have a grand jury matter, you only go to the judge if there's some sort of weird irregularity or you need a ruling on something. But a judge can't indict. Only a grand jury can indict. The judge is not there. The judge can't. So, again, I guess I'm in the same boat of I don't see anything remotely criminal here. I see bad motives by the administration. And I think if they do it, it'll fail. But again, I'm not willing to, when Trump took office a year ago now, I was a little skeptical that he would actually, or his DOJ would actually follow through. I was wrong on these prosecutions, because if you look at Trump 1, and I wrote the book criticizing Bill Barr, my first book, but Trump often called for this type of prosecutions during his first term, and Bill Barr would just ignore him and they would go away. And maybe that's somewhat of a credit to Bill Barr. But I kind of thought we'd be in the same position where Trump would be railing, so-and-so needs to be indicted, blah, blah, blah. And then it would just he would have his tantrum and that'd be that. But no, I mean, they did indict 2 people. So I'm certainly not going to vouch for this being over. I genuinely don't know what's going to happen, but I do feel confident saying none of these payback prosecutions, again, I'm putting Bolton in a different category, none of these payback prosecutions are ultimately going to succeed. I think they're going to continue to backfire.
And what about SDNY's investigation into a certain aspect of the Epstein case, in particular with Bill Clinton? And was that just a ruse? Was that just a distraction away from the obvious?
I just wrote about this for New York Magazine this week. DOJ needs to figure out what the hell they are doing, because whoever you talk to, different leaders are telling us completely different things. I mean, Pam Bondi went from, the files are on my desk, paraphrasing, to in July, she releases a memo, Pam Bondi and Kash Patel, saying, we've now reviewed all documents, nothing further to disclose, no further criminal cases to be made, case closed, to November, when Trump says, I hereby instruct a new criminal investigation on Bill Clinton and other Democrats. Pam Bondi, a few hours later, says, yes, sir, assigned to the SDNY, and they will vigorously prosecute as they always do. Then when Blanche turns over the Epstein files starting 2 weeks ago in December, he puts in a memo that says no further crimes to be charged here against any third party. So like Pam Bondi is saying different things than herself, than Todd Blanche. Every 2 weeks, I don't think they even know what they're doing. So I have no idea what the hell they're doing.
Well, they're just trying to make one person happy, and that person changes his mind based on God knows what every hour of every day. That's not a job you or I want. So, okay, so there's a bunch of really important SCOTUS decisions coming down.
So let me give you a couple other big ones. And by the way, I mean, before we get to Supreme Court, there's a couple other big, what I would call real crime cases that do have political aspects to them. I mean, the Luigi Mangione case will carry on. You know, there's obviously a lot of attention on that. The murder of Charlie Kirk, that case will probably
Tyler
happen.
Robinson.
But, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any question that, you know, who's guilty in either of those cases, that both of them are very, very guilty. But those will be there'll be a lot of focus on that. Supreme Court. There's some really huge, there's three big cases that are to watch for the Supreme Court. One of them, I guess, is a category. One is the continuation of the National Guard / military deployment cases. Now, just a week ago or so, a week and a half ago, the Supreme Court blocked Trump's deployment of the National Guard in Chicago, in Illinois. That was the decision I just talked to you about.
And LA and Portland too.
Well, by impact, yes.
Right.
I mean, the decision itself came out of Chicago, but it effectively blocked his deployment of the National Guard everywhere where there's a Democratic governor. Governors can always ask for it. But yes, and that was an interesting coalition because you had Roberts, Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett joining with the three liberal justices to block it. But it's not over for a couple reasons. One, that decision only blocked Trump's deployment. That decision only blocked Trump's deployment under this one specific law that he had been using, Section 12406, which basically said the president can deploy National Guard if he's unable with regular forces, quote unquote, to enforce the law. And the Supreme Court said, well, regular forces doesn't just mean if he's unable with the cops. It means if he's unable with the regular military to keep order and to enforce the law. And that hasn't happened here. And there's only a very narrow area that the military can even get involved in anyway. They can't do actual law enforcement. Mm-hmm. But the thing to watch for is, and Trump just sent out an angry Truth Social about this the other day, saying, I'm pulling everyone out of Portland and LA and, you know, screw you all. But he basically says, you know, we suppress crime, and when crime comes bouncing back, and it will, I'll be back. This isn't over. And so the big thing to watch is, will he at some point in 2026 try to redeploy the military, the National Guard? I think that's somewhere between very likely and a certainty. I think he's going to say, aha, crime rates are back up, and now I'm going to send everyone. And if he does it again, he can't use that law, 12406. Will he use the Insurrection Act, which is actually similar? It sounds much more dramatic, but it's actually pretty similar. The main difference is it allows him to use not just the National Guard, but all military, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. And, it allows him to use the military for law enforcement purposes. So it allows him to use the military to make arrests, to do search warrants, that kind of thing. So it is more dramatic. That law has not been invoked since 1992 during the Rodney King riots. It was invoked. I'll give you a little teaser. I'm working on a piece for CNN now about a very famous time when the Insurrection Act was used by Dwight Eisenhower in 1957 to integrate Little Rock Central High School in Arkansas, because Brown versus Board of Education came out in 1954. Southern states and localities resisted for years, using their National Guard to block Black students from coming into the high school. And Eisenhower said, no, you can't do that. You have to I'm enforcing the law. He used the Insurrection Act to deploy the military, the 101st Airborne, to walk in the Little Rock Nine, the Black students who integrated Little Rock High School into the high school. And so that's the kind of historic instance where we've seen the Insurrection Act used. Will Trump use it here? I think he's likely to. I think that's the reality.
Let's just play this out for a second.
Yeah.
If that were to happen, obviously there'd be lawsuits up the wazoo again. It lands back at the Supreme Court.
Probably.
What is Roberts?
Probably on the emergency docket again.
Yeah. And what is Roberts, Barrett, and Kavanaugh?
It's a great question. So if you look at the National Guard ruling, it's very narrow and linguistic and technocratic. It's not like this is wrong and we don't like it and it's dangerous and it doesn't comport with history. It's just like, how do you construe the phrase regular forces? So this is one, Andy, where I'm just 50-50. Like I neither result would surprise me either, but I just don't know. I don't want to vouch for like the what people are going to do. I feel safe saying the three liberals will certainly oppose it, and Thomas and Alito and probably Gorsuch will certainly be in favor of it. So it's going to come down to who gets two out of the other three, basically.
Well, it certainly would be the moment where the rubber meets the road in terms of, okay, we're allowing him to be a dictator. He's using
well, let me say this.
I don't know if they would do that.
I think part of the motivation for the National Guard ruling that we just saw is a fear of this is wrong. They don't say it, but I'm reading, this is wrong and this is dangerous, and we don't want to go down this path. And I'm talking about Roberts, Gorsuch, Roberts, Barrett, and Kavanaugh. But let's just find a very narrow off-ramp here, very linguistic, technical off-ramp. And the Supreme Court does that. And it wouldn't shock me if they do that again with the Insurrection Act, find some basis that, I think the answer would be you can invoke the Insurrection Act if you're unable to enforce federal law. So again, think of desegregation. Think of Little Rock, right? Federal law was Jim Crow is over and separate but equal is over. And Brown versus Board of Education happened 3 years prior. And here we are 3 years later, and you have localities, towns, states saying, no, we're still not letting black students in. That to me is paradigmatic, where you do need to say, okay, fine, now we're using physical force, now we're using the 101st, whatever. Just saying like, oh, there's a lot of crime and we need more bodies on the ground to reduce crime, that's totally different to me. Yeah. So I could see the Supreme Court ruling on that basis, but I also could see the Supreme Court sort of defer. I just don't know. Yeah. Okay, that's number one. Two more big ones for the Supreme Court. Birthright citizenship has finally come up to the Supreme Court through the full docket, right? It came up before that the district court judge making nationwide rulings actually was birthright citizenship technically, but they didn't decide birthright. Now they have taken birthright. They're going to decide this term. I think that'll be a June-ish, end of the term decision. I think Trump's going to lose. I'll make a prediction on this one. So just so people, sort of can follow along, birthright citizenship comes from the 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868 after the Civil War, which says all persons born or naturalized in the United States, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, we'll come back to that in a second, are automatically citizens. And for 150 years, that's how we've understood it. If you're born here, you are a citizen, unless you're the child of a diplomat or like an invading army. That's always been the understood exceptions, right? Trump comes along and issues his first day back in office. No, I want to cut that, not end it. It's sometimes misstated in the media as not end it, but I want it to be that if your parents are here illegally or even temporarily, on temporary legal status, it does not count. And that is contradicted by the way we've understood this for 150 years with prior decisions, and a bunch of different groups and people challenge Trump's interpretation of birthright. Every single court who has heard this, judges appointed by Ronald Reagan and George Bush and judges appointed by Barack Obama and Joe Biden, have all agreed. Basically, there are a couple dissenters but all the opinions that have come out of this have said Trump is wrong. There's a judge at Judge Coffenauer, I think he's a federal district court judge, I want to say in Washington State, who's a Reagan appointee, who said this is blatantly unconstitutional, what Trump's trying to do here. So I think he's going to lose in the Supreme Court. I'm fairly confident in that. I don't think it's going to be 9-0 because it's hard to break loose Thomas and Alito. But I think he's going to lose there. But look, massive implications. Something like 4.4, I saw 4+ million people currently have birthright citizenship status. It's fundamental to what we are as a country. Not every country has that. We're one of only 30 or so countries that has this type of notion. But it goes back to the notion of protecting the children of slaves and making sure that they have their citizenship rights. And I think Trump's going to lose. I certainly believe he's wrong on the law on that one, but we will finally get a ruling on that, a year and a half after he came in and issued it. So that's another big one to watch.
Yeah, it would be very consequential because it would, in my opinion, it would be the first time that the court really allows him to break the Constitution.
I agree. I mean, what they'll do is say, well, he's properly interpreted, but I agree with you. I think the Constitution is quite clear. You know, what they're going to argue is that subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Again, historically, that's meant to just mean like you can't arrest a diplomat, right? So a diplomat's not, or an invading army. They're arguing, well, if the parents are here illegally, let's say they're citizens of Mexico, they're not subject to the United States jurisdiction. They're subject to the jurisdiction of Mexico. That's bullshit, though. If you're here illegally, you can be arrested by the United States government. You can be imprisoned by the United States government. You can be taxed by the United. Of course, they're subject to our jurisdiction. So I agree with you. I think it will go to, if that case goes Trump's way, I think that will fundamentally change something about who we are as a people. I think that would be a pretty flagrant, repudiation of the 14th Amendment as written. So yeah,
and a really significant expansion of his executive power.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of, the last one that we're looking for is the tariff ruling, which I believe will come in January. This one's going to happen very, very quickly. The Supreme Court expedited this one. I'm fairly I listened to that oral argument. By the way, oral argument has not yet happened on birthright, but oral argument did happen in November on the tariff case. Sometimes you can listen to oral argument and go, oh, this is over, right? It wasn't quite that clear, but I think Trump's going to lose on the tariffs. I think he's going to lose. I think again, the three liberals will be against him. Thomas and Alito will be with him. But I think of the four remaining, at least three of them, I think, are going to go with the liberals here. I think they're going to. So Trump used this International Economic Emergencies Powers Act to issue the tariffs. And I think they're going to find that Congress never intended through that specific law to give the president to issue tariffs of this nature. And perhaps that it wasn't actually an emergency. I mean, the emergency Trump cited was that we have trade deficits. It's like we've had trade deficits for 40 years. Trade deficits aren't even necessarily bad. I mean, trade deficit just means we import more than we export. So if there's a country that grows, I don't know, guava, and we import guava from them, and they don't import anything from us, we have a trade deficit. Like, why is that bad? We pay for the stuff, we get the guava. You know what I mean? Like, so I think he's going to lose on that one. But two big things. Well, number one, that doesn't mean it's done. He can try to issue tariffs. There are laws that allow presidents to issue tariffs. The ruling would just be he can't do it under that law. And so there's other ways he can try to come back and issue tariffs. And I think he probably will do that. The other thing is, like, this case will have a massive impact economically. I mean, the number one question I get asked, Andy, just by like our building, CNN's building in New York, we're sort of in an area with a lot of finance, people. And so a lot of what I'll just call finance bros, lovingly call finance bros with their quarter zips, go, hey man, you're that legal guy, right? Like, what's going to happen with tariffs? And I always tell people, don't invest based on anything I say. Don't buy or sell stocks or T-bills or whatever. But I think it's going to get struck down. And there's another complicated question about, well, how about the billions in tariffs that are tens of billions that have already been paid?
Right.
Here, I'm going to make a very specific prediction. During the oral argument, Barrett was asking about that. Like, wouldn't this be a mess? Like, do you have to refund them all? Do we have to now take $90 billion out of the federal treasury? I think the Supreme Court's going to basically say tariffs are no good under this law, but no paybacks. Like, what's already paid is already paid. And it's not retroactive because the payback process will be a disaster. It'll be a mess.
Who do you pay? Is it the countries, quote
unquote?
Well,
no. So I'm glad you raised this because Trump misleadingly says China has paid us $10 billion in tariffs.
Right.
Mexico has paid us. The countries don't pay. The government of China isn't cutting a check to us for tariffs. It's U.S. importers.
And taxpayers.
A friend of mine. Yes, and they pass it on to us. A friend of mine is imports athletic gear like jerseys and stuff. He pays it.
Yes.
He pays it. And then he passes on the cost mostly to us, to taxpayers. So yeah, like who gets, right? Like, I mean, if there was rebates, if you think about it, it would actually probably be a windfall for the importers because they would keep the rebates and they wouldn't go find everyone who bought a jersey and send us $40. You know what I mean?
How do you even do that? How do you find the Elie Honigs and the Ostroys who bought a jersey?
Exactly. So I think that's how it's going to come down. I think it's going to say no good. But again, important to understand, the Supreme Court does not rule on policies. The Supreme Court does not say tariffs, no. They rule on whether the administration can issue a policy under a specific law. And I'll give you an example. It's okay for an administration to come back legally and try again under a different law. Biden, his student loan program was struck down under the first law he tried to use, whatever. It was this loan forgiveness law that was passed for soldiers. I forget the name of it. And the Supreme Court struck it down. And then he tried again under a different law, which he's allowed to do. So you can argue, look, there's an argument that it's politically unwise to do that. But if Trump loses tariffs, he will try again. But I will say this, and I've written this, if and when the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs, they're doing him a favor, because I'm not an economic expert, but every person I know who is, including conservatives, basically says it's a bad idea the way he's done it. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, watch, this is going to happen, Andy. If he loses tariffs, any blip of bad economic news for the next 3 years, if inflation rates blip up 0.1%, if unemployment blips up 0.1%, he's going to go, well, folks, this never would have happened if I had my beautiful tariffs. If the Supreme Court hadn't taken away my tariffs, you would all be rich right now. There'd be zero unemployment. Inflation would be negative. There would be deflation. It will be his crutch for the next 3 years economically.
But interestingly, this week he rolled back a lot of the taxes on home furnishings and construction things, like the new cabinetry. So he's already, and he's been doing that for months and months. So his own actions sort of indicate that he knows this hasn't worked. But you're right. He'd be like, we were taking in trillions of dollars.
Oh my God, the number. Can I just tell you my number one? CNN ran a very funny piece at the end of the year called Trump's 25 Biggest Lies of 2025 by Daniel Dale, our fact checker. And, it's the usual array of silliness. But the one that made me laugh was Trump has said that he has brought down prescription drug prices by 500%. At one point, he said by 2,000%, by 3,000%. Now, I'm not that much of a financial expert, but I know that
you went to grade school,
right? Like the most you can bring down a price is 100%, which would make it free. If you bring down prices 500%, that means they're paying you every time you get a prescription drug. Right? You can't reduce prices more than 100%.
No, but did you hear Howard Lutnick's explanation? He tried to do a cleanup of this.
What did he say? No. What did he say?
He said what Donald Trump was saying is that if something costs $1 and you bring it down to 20 cents.
Right, that's 80%, right?
Yeah, it's 80%. Yeah, but if you then bring it back up to its original price, that's an 800% increase. And I'm like, why the hell would anyone bring it back to the original price? Right?
What the hell?
That is the dumbest attempt at cleanup I've ever seen in my life.
That one made me laugh just because, it takes a second, right? You just sort of hear it and you're like, oh, it's the usual bluster. He's making up stats. And then you're like, oh, wait, you can't reduce drug prices.
What I thought you were going to say, because this drove me crazy at the height of his tariff madness, is that literally from hour to hour, the number would change in terms of how much we're making. One moment he'd be like, we're getting hundreds of billions we took in. And then an hour later, be like 4 trillion. I'm like, wait, what just happened here? It went from 300 billion to 4 trillion in a matter of 2 hours. And he would do this every day, day after day, back and forth between hundreds of billions and trillions.
For sure. This year is going to be huge. I think 2025 was as consequential a year as we've had for the law in a long time. And look, I think one of the big things that came out of it is expansion of executive power. Trump was allowed to do a lot of the things he tried to do. The courts deferred, by and large, led by the Supreme Court, have given him more power, certainly within the executive branch than presidents were previously understood to have. He can fire the heads of agencies for pretty much any reason now. But I actually think 26 is going to be a year of pulling back a bit on Trump by the courts. If we're looking at the legal cases, I think the payback prosecutions will continue to fail. I think he's going to lose tariffs. I think he's going to lose birthright. And I think if probably, again, I'm 50-50, but I think, the Supreme Court ended 25 by pulling back on the use of military and National Guard. So I think whereas 25 was an expansion of Trump's powers and presidential powers, I think 26 is going to be a retraction.
Yeah, and I
might
think
be wrong.
also, I think you're right. I think you're right, and I think it's because they're not going to hand him the keys to the democracy. But in the cases of tariffs and birthright citizenship in particular, we're also going to see, where the true strict constructionists are.
Yeah.
And because those would literally be in my opinion, rewriting the Constitution to give Trump more power. But in the last minute or two, there's also a few other cases that are coming down in the Supreme Court, and that one is conversion therapy, another is trans athletes and women's sports.
Yeah.
And, Voting Rights Act, Section 2. I mean, they've gutted that Voting Rights Act for years. Trump versus Slaughter, which I think is really important.
Oh, that's the FTC. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's so much going on.
Yeah.
In the Supreme Court.
I mean, the trans therapy, it will be interesting because the Supreme Court has ruled thus far that trans status is not the same as sex, right? Because if it is the same as sex, then you get a higher level of constitutional protection. So I think they're likely to rule in favor of states that are restricting those type of treatments. So with the Voting Rights Act, you're right that the Supreme Court has consistently over the last decade or so just narrowed the Voting Rights Act. And again, it's not it has to do with voting rights. I mean, they just recently allowed Texas to move forward with its gerrymander. So watch this. I mean, the door's open. Blue states, red states can pretty much are free to do what they want. And then the Slaughter decision is really important because that one hasn't been ruled on yet. But if you listen to the argument, this is where Trump fired the head of the FTC just for no cause, just because he said, I'm the president and I have the power to do so. He's going to win that one. I mean, I listened to that oral argument. It's going to be 6-3. And the Supreme Court's going to say that these laws issued by Congress that limit the way the president can hire, fire, manage the executive branch agencies just are unconstitutional. That's up to the president. He's the head of the executive branch, and Congress it violates separation of powers if they try to limit it. So I think that will be an expansion of presidential power. But there'll be some on both sides of the scale.
Do you think that there'll be limitations with that ruling?
Maybe
with regard to the carve out for the Fed?
Well, yes, for sure. So clearly the Fed is different. The court has already gone out of its way to say the Fed is different. And watch for that. I mean, there's the case over whether he can fire Lisa Cook, right? The one of the Fed governors. That's a big one too. But the Fed is different. I think they've already more than forecasted that they see the Fed differently. There's a way they might let him fire Lisa Cook, though. They could say he does have cause, right? Because remember, he said, I'm firing her because she engaged in mortgage fraud. We don't know. We don't know the strength of that case or whatever. It's all just like these Twitter allegations. But they can dodge the issue if they say, look, the president's the one who determines cause. Who are we as judges to come in and say, yes, he does or does not have cause? That will enable them to dodge the issue of, can he fire a Fed? Does he have the power to fire the Fed governor? Because if he has cause, that's what the law already requires. So that's a big one too.
Yeah. Elie, good stuff. You're right. It's going to be a very consequential year. And I appreciate you coming on and talking about that as well as what we just witnessed in 2025.
Thanks, Andy. Have a great, happy, and healthy new year. I'll see you soon.
You too. Take care.
All right.
Thanks. Bye-bye. This episode was produced and edited by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-produced by Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud for Radio Free Rhinecliff, with additional editing by Matty Rosenberg, music by Andrew Hollander, and graphic design by Cricket Langale. And with a special thanks to our sponsor, The Epicurean. Again, thanks for listening. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and subscribe to the Backroom with Andy Ostroy YouTube channel, where you can watch full videos of our interviews. See you next time.